here's what you're like if you're orderly or if you're industrious. You carry out your plans. You don't waste time. You don't find it difficult to get down to work. You don't mess things up. You finish what you start. You put your mind on the task at hand. You get things done quickly. You know what you're doing. You don't postpone decisions, and you're not easily distracted. That's what an industrious person is like. We don't know anything about industrious people. We cannot figure out why they're industrious. If you read the neuropsychological literature, you might assume that people who have highly functioning prefrontal cortexes might be more conscientious, because people associate the prefrontal cortex with such things as the capacity to plan. The problem with that is that we've, for example, tested now thousands of people using tests of dorsolateral prefrontal cognitive ability, which are basically cognitive tests. And as you know from being in this class, if you take a battery of cognitive tests and you subject them to a factor analysis, you can extract out a first factor, and that's fluid intelligence. And the correlation between fluid intelligence and conscientiousness is 0. Right, so that's very, very strange, because you would tend to think that people who were smarter might be better at planning, and maybe they are, but they're not necessarily better at implementing. And and we don't understand the difference between planning and implementation. We don't know what that is. You got to think about it this way too, though. Just because you're better at planning wouldn't necessarily imply that you're better at implementing, because actually one of the prerequisites for thinking abstractly is that you can detach your plans from your action, right? Because otherwise you just automatically act out everything you planned. But that isn't what people do. They separate out their thinking so that they can work in an abstract space that's divorced from their action, and so they can lay out multiple plans without necessarily acting them out. But then that introduces the additional complication of having to implement, and industrious people seem to be good at implementation. But we don't know why. We've done all sorts of laboratory studies trying to see if we could get some sort of laboratory task that industrious people would do better in the lab than non-industrious people. God, you'd think that would be a snap. We probably tested 50 things and have never got anything. Differences in language use is as close as we've got. You can extract out estimates of people's conscientiousness or their industriousness from the way they use language, but that's not a lot different than using self-report personality scales. It's different, but it's not a lot different. So we've done things, for example, like imagine we present people with a row of H's, N's, M's, and U's, row after row of letters, small type. You say, go through and circle all the U's. Well, obviously, you would think that that would be a task that would require diligence and industriousness. You could time how long it took people to do it. You could see how accurate they were. Correlation with conscientiousness? Nothing. 0. It's an IQ task, as it turns out. And so the best we've been able to do so far, maybe, with industriousness is, and this is so vague, it's embarrassing, is that we think that maybe industrious people find inactivity aversive. So, because they're not motivated by enthusiasm, right, for the task, that would be an extrovert, and they're not motivated by intrinsic interest in the task, that would be someone who was open, and they're not motivated by the desire to decrease anxiety or emotional pain, because that would be someone who's high in neuroticism, right, and they're not motivated by the desire to foster affiliative relationships or to compete, because that looks like it loads on agreeableness. It's something else. It does a good job of predicting military prowess, for example. We tested a number of people who worked in the US military in a number of different places. Conscientiousness was a deadly predictor of ranking in military performance in schools like the US Naval Academy, for example, and also on military bases themselves. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, the military is a conservative place. You'd expect people who are conscientious and dutiful to do better in a place like that. But so they're good at implementation, they're good at following orders, they're good at doing their duty.